Katie Seal with the State Historical Society of Missouri is with us today, and we're going to talk about this race that goes from LA to New York and the importance of that. And the reason we're talking about this is we're entering a period when we're celebrating the centennial of Route 66. So, Katie, you've done some research on this race. It's beyond an ultra marathon. It might be an ultra marathon.
Yeah, and this is a time period where you had marathons, but you didn't have anything like this at this. We have now some of the ultra marathons and the, bigger events, but it was pretty interesting and pretty groundbreaking for its time.
So let's talk about the creator. This guy was pretty flamboyant, as I understand.
Yes, CC Pyle he was kind of this larger than life athletic. He did some sports himself and then kind of transitioned into wanting to be the promoter or organizer, owner, whatever got him, I guess, billing time or something he thought he could make money on. So, I mean, just prior to the Bunion Derby, he actually owns a football team, kind of in the very early stages of like the National Football League. It doesn't go well. I think they had maybe 2 seasons.
Okay.
Yeah, he tried to start another team there in New York in kind of competition, thinking, I think he actually rented out Yankee Stadium for a season. I don't know what something like that cost in the 1920s, but very big ideas for this guy that don't always pan out, but he's always thinking big and goes big, which kind of lands him in trouble a time or two.
Yeah. And part of this race is in that style of what's the phrase? Fly by the seat of your pants. So as they enter
Absolutely.
Missouri, they're really flying by the seat of their pants.
Absolutely. So the idea for what they officially called the Transcontinental Foot Race very quickly becomes dubbed the Bunion Derby because of all of the foot problems that the racers incur over the course of this, as you would imagine. So the idea comes out of actually one of the National Route 66 Association meetings of trying to promote the road, of bringing attention to Route 66 at that time period. So they knew that from California, at least through Chicago, they were going to go on Route 66, but he wanted to make it all the way across the country. So he was literally still figuring out what highways and roads to take from Chicago to make it to New York City. Even along Route 66, I mean, along the whole route, it was they had what they called control points of where they were going to stop each night. And that actually changed from almost every day of where it might be of, are we going to stop in this town or this town? And some of that was, some planning on his part. Some of that was also seeking funds. So to get the Bunion Derby to actually stop, for the racers to stop in your town for the night, usually the local town business leaders, chamber of commerce, whatever the town had to put up some money towards.
Okay.
So some money had to go towards CC Pyle and the race in general to get them to stop in your town for the night, which actually created quite a bit of controversy when they first got into Missouri. They were supposed to stop in Carthage. So the townspeople, business leaders, the chamber there had actually put up some money, and they were supposed to stop. I think would have been their first or second night that they were supposed to stop in Missouri was going to be in Carthage. But I guess it's unclear of who did it. Someone in Joplin puts up, I think it's like $2,000, which is quite a bit of money for a town that size in 1928.
Right.
And so they end up stopping in Joplin instead of Carthage. And if you look at the newspaper articles kind of Carthage and Joplin. Just, it's like that hometown rivalry of like, how dare you, is really quite interesting and entertaining.
I understand there were some eggs involved because Carthage was so upset about this. Is that true?
There were. So they stopped in Joplin. I believe that was that first evening, but they still had to. So they then went up 66 through Carthage on their way. I think they stopped at Miller the next night. And locals were waiting for them. Some accounts even note that the eggs weren't all that fresh. And so CC Pyle was in this big old touring car. It had kind of billboards across it. There were several follow cars that had like the cook, the medic, the guy who repaired the shoes, because he essentially set up a tent city each night when they started, and it was almost this whole carnival situation. So there was a lot of cars, and I think they were all welcomed into Carthage with less than enthusiastic, happiness for sure.
That's great.
Yeah.
I understand also a Missouri man led the race as they entered Missouri. Who is this?
Yeah, so I've actually been able to find four different guys with Missouri ties that raced in the 1928 and 1929, but it was a John Gober who led into Missouri. So he wasn't necessarily leading the race overall, but for that day. And then he led the next several days throughout Missouri. So he was the head of the pack and got to the control point at the end of each of those days. And he was out of Moberly, Missouri. So of course, the Missouri guy comes in, he gets a little bit of attention and some recognition, and that was really kind of part of his motivation, is he really wanted to lead the group as they came into Missouri.
So they wind up in Rolla at one point, and
Yes.
this is a big deal for Rolla.
It is, and I mean, it was a big deal for a lot of the smaller towns all along the route. So they do come through Springfield, um, which was kind of controversial because it wasn't going to, like, literally they were in Miller, they stopped in there, and they were supposed to head through Springfield and stop there the next day. But I guess CC Pyle felt they hadn't paid enough towards the race, but a few businesses were able to pull together and send that to him. So he did come through and stop there in Springfield, and then continued on. So places like Conway and Lebanon and Waynesville, and then here in Rolla, get these international runners. Some of them had, support vehicles. Some of them were just local individuals that didn't necessarily have a trainer. They were kind of doing it on their own. And then, like I mentioned, CC Pyle kind of had this whole amusement tent city carnival that he would drive ahead, and that would kind of set up in the town for kind of like the, I guess, afternoon and through the evening, that locals could come out and check out the different sites and attractions. And then quite often, what really surprised me is a lot of the runners would get to these local towns, check in or whatever, but then they would go out and catch a movie, go to a dance. They might be invited to a dinner with different groups around town. So like, I would have just been exhausted, but they were, I guess, ready to go and see the sights of some of these communities.
And that was part of the deal. Now, speaking of exhausted, they start out with about 200 runners. What are they down to about halfway through this cross country trip by the time they get to Rolla?
So by the time it's less than half by the time they're hitting Missouri. They're really, so I think there's kind of some different numbers as far as entries in the upper 200s and stuff, but there's officially 199 listed in CC Pyle kind of makes this promotional booklet that he also, again, sells along the way with profiles of each of the runners for the 1928. So there's 199 in there. And so there's about 74, 75 by the time they reach Missouri. I say 74, 75 because some of them reach Missouri, but by the time they hit, I think it was Springfield, some of them were disqualified because it was discovered that some of them had caught rides on previous
Oh my.
days in Oklahoma leading into Missouri. So that was one of the things that could get you disqualified, was obviously hitching a ride from somebody for any portion of the trek.
You're not really racing at that point.
No, no, the cars weren't going fast those days, but you had to be on foot the entire time. Yep.
uh, they are in Rolla and they leave and they eventually have a path to New York. Tell
Mhm.
me about the man who wins this race.
Yeah, so for the 1928 race, it's Andy Payne. And so really by the time they're in Missouri, Andy Payne had already kind of starting to pull ahead. But he wasn't the clear winner yet. But after they leave Missouri, he just continues to pull further and further ahead. So he was a member of the Cherokee Nation out of Oklahoma, which is great because you get some really great press on him when they're going through the entirety of Oklahoma. And so he comes in first by quite a margin, actually, by the time they reach New York City. And he gets the grand prize of $25,000, which, if you think in 1928, that's quite a cash prize. And he takes it. He helps out his family farm, and then essentially retires from racing at that point. He does a few other smaller ones, but nothing to this scale. He doesn't come back to race in 1929, but he does come back as kind of one of the entertainment. So he's there. He gets to ride. He gets to ride in a car this time, and he goes ahead to each of the communities they're coming to kind of promote and talk about his experience having been a racer and that sort of thing.
This is also 1928 is also a time when segregation is alive and well in the United States. Yet you do have some African American runners in this race too.
Yeah, for 1928, you actually had a handful of them. Some of them were Americans. There was one who led the pack as well and ended up finishing in the top 10, who was from Jamaica. So Philip Granville and Eddie Gardner are two of the notable ones, since that they finished in the top 10 of the race. And Eddie Gardner actually came back for 1929 and raced, but I think ended up dropping out after an injury. And yeah, once they kind of reach, especially some of those states with segregation, I believe there's a story, I think they were in Texas, where there was actually someone who followed them with a gun
Mm,
as they went along the race. They had some racial slurs thrown at them. They
mm,
weren't allowed to stay at some of the stopping points that the other racers were in some cases. So there was always a tent with cots where the racers could stay. So in some of the more rural locations where there weren't hotels available or that sort of thing, that's where the racers would stay. But quite often, there would be places like YMCA's or maybe a local hotel that would let the racers stay at their establishment. Sometimes the racers, if they had the money, paid for a hotel room. Um, One, probably for shower facilities and to actually get a good night's rest. But in a lot of these cases, the black runners weren't afforded. They weren't allowed necessarily to stop places or go in for restaurants or entertainment, quite like some of the other runners were able to do. And you actually do see Eddie Gardner and Philip Granville actually run together for a good portion of the race through segregated states. So places like Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri, they actually stayed pretty much side by side with each other. And then I don't remember if they had a follow car or not, but yeah, it was kind of a safety issue as well. And, the promoters were trying to um, mitigate that. But you had groups here in Springfield that reached out to them and invited them, intentionally invited them to come to dinner that evening that they were in town and that sort of thing. But yeah, unfortunately, it was a little bit rough for them in several communities that they had to go through.
so they're helping break the color barrier, but they never are able to forget every step of the way that there is a barrier and that they are going to be treated differently, these men.
Yeah, and there's a really great book about Eddie Gardner as well. So both of these guys are runners. They've run other places. Eddie's from up in Seattle, so hadn't quite faced this level. And I don't think either of them, none of the runners that gave accounts were quite prepared for some of the hostility that they faced. They're like, we're just guys running through. You
Yeah.
know, we're just trying to run here, win a race, maybe earn some money, just trying to be athletes. And even that, they weren't allowed to just be like all the rest of the runners along the course.
Now, the State Historical Society of Missouri has film, must be pretty rare, of this race from 1928. How did you come into possession of that film?
Yeah, so there is some footage of the race, like kind of when it starts in California, and then there's some stuff in New York, and there's very little actual like video footage, in between those 2 points. There's some really great images, especially going through like places like New Mexico and Oklahoma. We've got a few scattered images of them here in Missouri, but this is actual footage of them entering into Springfield, and you can see the streets are all lined with people cheering them on. They're getting a motorcycle cop escort, through town. And you can see each of the individual runners, which is really nice because they've got their numbers on there, so we're able to identify them. And so this is some old E-Path footage, so it's pretty grainy, and it definitely looks like 1920s, but it's really kind of fascinating to see just the level of excitement and interest that people had in, you can read it in newspaper reports of how people lined the streets and were cheering them on, and sometimes kids would get out into the road and run alongside them for a while, but you actually get to see a little bit of that excitement as they come through town.
So you are an ambassador in a way for the reason we're talking about this race, the Bunion Derby. You are an ambassador for the State Historical Society of Missouri when it comes to the centennial of Route 66, and you've met with people in other organizations. What are those other organizations, and how are you involved in making sure people are able to celebrate this 100th anniversary?
Yeah, so I'm kind of our head, our representative, I guess, for the Route 66 Centennial. I'm also representing kind of SHS, but also the state of Missouri on a group called Research Route 66. So that is a collaboration of libraries, museums, archives from across all 8 states, which is really great because sometimes I think we get a little focused on our state, but then to be able to interact and collaborate with the entire road, essentially, of like-minded professionals who are just interested in preserving and making available research materials for Route 66 is really great. So we've got some programs going on. We're going to have a monthly online symposium from of you know historians and researchers on the experts of Route 66 are going to get to share some of their knowledge with us, which I think is going to be great. I've also worked with, we kind of collaborate some with the Road Ahead. So that's made up of mostly Route 66 associations across, again, all 8 states. And there's also an international Route 66 association. I don't think people realize how many there are Route 66 associations in countries, mostly around Europe, of people just fascinated by it, the car culture, the travel. They, put together tour groups and, come over to the States and will either, maybe they'll take a bike or their RV or a car and travel the road. So it's a really great group of people to get involved and work with.
I understand you're working with Google in some way also. What is that project?
Yeah, so through the group Research Route 66, I got connected with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So they have been working with Google, in particular, the Google Arts and Culture platform. So this is a great way to highlight museums, art institutes, archives, cultural institution, historic sites on this online kind of accessible platform through Google. And it's really great because you can get the app, you can go online, and you can check out, what's near me. Are there museums or exhibits going on in and around my community, or if you happen to be traveling? So they're doing a Route 66 theme one, and we are the Missouri representative on there. So we've got some of our materials up online. So there's postcards, there's photographs, there's maps, there's some video. We've also got a couple different stories. So we're highlighting different locations and events and people from all along Route 66 in Missouri, and we're getting those up online. So I just found out today that our story on Radio Ozark and the Ozark Jubilee and kind of the entertainment aspect of Springfield just went up live and online. So I hope people check that out because it's a really great story on itself, but also its Route 66 connections really, really fun to highlight.
I'll put a link in this story on ky3.com. Katie Seal, State Historical Society of Missouri, I greatly appreciate your time, and I look forward